best time to learn swimming is when one is drowning in the middle of a storm. True, false? Of course, it is false. Yes, so if you want to swim very easily through the ocean of this world, you need to develop these qualities, the qualities of belief in yourself, the qualities of concentration, the qualities of perseverance, of determination now itself. Yes, now is the time. You need to tell to yourself every day and if required innumerable times during the day that you are tougher than any problem that might arise in your life. You are limitless, you are priceless, and if you want from the bottom of your heart, there is nothing that you cannot achieve. So with that, we start with the clinical anatomy of the septum and the diseases of the nasal septum. So what do you think the septum is mainly made up of? Is it cartilaginous or is it bony? What? Cartilaginous? It's all the time we say septal cartilage, that forces us to believe that septum is mainly cartilaginous. No, it is not mainly cartilaginous. It is mainly bony. Septum is mainly bony. Now, the septum actually is divided into three parts. The lowermost part of the septum, this is formed by the medial crura of the lower alar cartilage, the alar cartilage. Yes, so we have seen the alar cartilage earlier also. It is a U-shaped cartilage like this, and it has a lateral crura that forms a part of the external nose, and it has a medial crura. The medial crura of both the sides, they fuse to form the lowermost part of the septum, and this part of the septum is what is known as the columellar septum. So this is the columellar septum. Columellar septum. So this is the parts of septum. Parts of septum. Now just above the columellar septum is an area, just feel in your septum. Yes, just above the columellar septum is an area where we have only skin of both the sides meeting. We do not have any cartilage in between. That is what is known as membranous septum because no cartilage there. So that area is what is known as the membranous septum. So this is the membranous septum. Membranous septum, and above that rest of the septum is what is known as the septum proper. And in the septum proper we have only the antero-inferior part. Just note here, only this part which is cartilaginous. Only this part which is cartilaginous, and this is what is known as the septal cartilage. This is known as the septal cartilage, and because of its shape, it is also known as quadrangular cartilage. It is quadrangular in shape, so it is known as quadrangular cartilage. Quadrangular cartilage. Other than this, the septum proper is mainly bony. So what are the bones? So we have this bone here. Let me just label it as 1. So this bone here, this we have already read. It is a part of the ethmoid coming down from the cruciform plate perpendicularly. So this is what is known as the perpendicular plate of ethmoid. So yes, this is the perpendicular plate of ethmoid. Perpendicular plate of ethmoid. Now behind that we have this part of the septum. This is what is known as vomer. So this bone is known as vomer. So mainly the septum proper has these three components. One cartilage, that is the septal or the quadrangular cartilage, and we have two main bones, the perpendicular plate of ethmoid and vomer. Now along with these two bones there are additional bones. Now all around whatever structures are there, they give some projection on the septum. So what are these bones? These also we need to know. If you just remember this picture, you will know all of them. Yes, so here we have anteriorly, we have this part. Yes, just see here, which I mark as 3. So this is the nasal process of the frontal bone. So that forms a part of the septum, the nasal spine of the frontal bone. So 3 is the nasal spine of frontal bone. Nasal spine of frontal bone. Do we need to actually know all this? Yes, has been asked which of the following bone does not contribute to the septum. Now there the choice that was given was very simple. It was lacrimal bone. We know lacrimal bone is here, right? And where is septum? Septum is in the center, so definitely that cannot form a part of the septum. But yes, they can ask which are the parts of the septum, and there the choice can be a little dubious. So you need to know, and this is not difficult to remember. You just need to know what are the structures around, and you will know what the parts of the septum are, what their contributions are. Now posteriorly we have the sphenoid here. So this here is the sphenoid. Now the sphenoid gives one projection, a small projection on the septum. See, a very small projection this is, but yes, this is what we need to know, that this is 4. I will label it as 4, and this is what is known as the rostrum of sphenoid. Rostrum of sphenoid. Rostrum of sphenoid. And now inferiorly, now just have a look inferiorly. What is the inferior wall of the nose? Yes, that is formed by the palate. Palate will be formed by which bone? Obviously palatine bone. But palatine bone forms only the posterior part of the palate. Yes, so posteriorly it is the horizontal part of the palatine bone. I have told earlier also that palatine bone has a horizontal part and it has a vertical part posteriorly. So this is the horizontal part. And anteriorly in the septum, we have the part of the palatine process of the maxilla. So the maxilla gives a plate, that is the palatine plate or the palatine process of the maxilla. Now both these give some projection to the septum. So this is known as the palatine crest, and this is what is known as the crest of maxillary bone. So this I am labeling as 5. So what is 5? 5 is the crest of palatine bone, and this I am labeling as 6. This is crest of maxilla. 6 is crest of maxilla. So these are the parts. Otherwise, mainly whenever we talk about septum, whenever we think about septum, whenever we operate on the septum, we are mainly operating on which part of the septum? The septum proper. So can you quickly tell me the 3 parts of the septum? Yes, the lowermost part, this is known as the columellar septum, and this columellar makes me reminds me of the columellar tympanoplasty. You also remember that? Columellar tympanoplasty, what was that? Yes, columellar tympanoplasty, that is type 3 tympanoplasty. This is columellar septum. Yes, next is membranous septum, and then is septum proper. Yes, septum proper is mainly cartilaginous or bony. It is mainly cartilaginous or bony. It is mainly, yes, it is mainly bony. But why do we always remember the septal cartilage? Yes, did you notice that the septal cartilage, though it is forming only the anterior-inferior part of the nose, yes, it gives a support to the lower 2/3 of the nose, the cartilaginous part of the external nose, that is supported on the septum, which means that if we are not careful while operating on the septal cartilage, if we remove most of the septal cartilage, what have we done? We have removed the support to this dorsum. This dorsum support has gone, and it will ultimately result in lowering of the dorsum, which is known as saddling of the dorsum. Now, the most common deformity of the septum is a deviation of the nasal septum, and that is what is known as DNS, deviated nasal septum. What do you think is the most common cause of DNS? DNS, most common cause is trauma. Trauma is a leading cause, but that is not the most common cause. The most common cause of DNS is birth trauma. So, the most common cause is birth trauma. Birth trauma. Now, what does that mean, birth trauma? Yes, in the intrauterine life, there are compression forces on the fetus. If there are compression forces, they will create pressure on the septum, that will create microfractures. Also during delivery while passes through the birth canal, if there is compression on the septum, and if it's a difficult labor, prolonged labor, if there's compression on the nose, that is the most prominent part of the face, so that can lead to microfractures, and these microfractures later on can become areas of weaknesses which will lead to deviation of the septum. And also it can occur because of developmental error. What is developmental error? When there is an unequal development between the base of skull and the palate. then the septum gets compressed in between. That can also lead to microfractures, which can develop into deviation later on. So the most common is birth trauma. The other causes are developmental error, and also a very, very common cause is trauma. Now also has been a question that has been asked in the past, that what is the percentage of newborns that are born with DNS? Yes. So earlier, Scott Brown mentioned it as 58%. And the most recent edition of Scott Brown mentions it as between 1 to 80%, which means that now this question is not going to be asked from you, because they are not labeling any specific number. Yes, so different books give different answers to this. But yes, these are the values that have been given in Scott Brown. So earlier, when this was given as the question, when it was asked there, the answer was 58%. But now I don't think any question like this will be asked, because now the range is so wide. It is 1 to 80%, which means if it is 1 to 80% of the newborns which are born with DNS, a septal repair or a septal reconstruction, that is known as a plastic repair of the septum, remodeling of the septum, septoplasty, that should be the most common surgery that we should be doing. Is it so bad? Now, even if the lot of newborns are born with a deviation of the septum, most of them are not symptomatic, which means that if you just examine anybody's nose, okay, you read the septum and then you start examining your friend's nose, your brother's nose, your sister's nose, and you see, my God, there is a deviation. So will you advise that person to go for a surgery if that patient is not symptomatic? No. And symptomatic patients are very few. They are not very much. So what are the symptoms that we should look for? What are the symptoms that a deviation of the septum, if symptomatic, produces, which will help us to know that yes, this is a patient that can be helped by a surgery of the DNS, can be helped by a correction of the deviated nasal septum. Yes, so what are the symptoms we need to know? So what are these symptoms? Yes, it can be nasal obstruction. That's the leading symptom. Nasal obstruction. So if somebody's nose is chronically obstructed and you can see that it is a deviation of the septum, DNS, then we know that yes, if we correct it, then the obstruction will be relieved. Or if because of nasal obstruction, there is obstruction of the metatarsus, because the septum compresses the turbinate and the metatarsus get blocked, the drainage of the sinuses gets blocked, and that leads to recurrent sinusitis. So that also can be an indication for operating on the septum. So recurrent sinusitis. Now, if there is recurrent sinusitis, usually in children, what happens is that the discharge, when it goes posteriorly, when it reaches the eustachian tube in children is smaller, it is more horizontal, so it can very easily go into the ear. So if there is recurrent otitis media, if there is recurrent acute otitis media, then also you need to operate. Now, also what can happen is headache. Now, what is this headache? This headache can occur because of either recurrent sinusitis, headache, or also there is something which is known as Sludger's neuralgia. Sludger's neuralgia. What is the Sludger's neuralgia? What is the Sludger's neuralgia? Now, whenever there is a sharp spur, what's the meaning of spur? Now, just see here. This is a septal spur. This is a septal spur. The meaning of spur is a sharp deflection, and this sharp deflection usually occurs at the junction of the bone and cartilage. We know that the cartilage, septal cartilage inferiorly is sitting on the maxillary bone, the crest of maxilla. Yes, and posteriorly the crest of palatine bone. Superiorly we have the perpendicular plate of ethmoid. Posteriorly we have the vomer. So all around our bones. So at the junction of the cartilage and the bone, at any of these sites, if there's a sharp deflection, that is what is known as a spur. So if the spur compresses on the lateral wall, if it is so sharp and it is so big that it compresses on the lateral wall, it can compress on the nerves at that particular area, leading to constant headache. And that compression of the nerves, that can lead to this headache. This is what is known as Sludger's neuralgia. Now, also what can happen is because of the DNS. Now, just notice here, in this patient, there is a DNS you are seeing. Now, because of this deviation, Now, when the air will enter through this nostril, it will directly go and hit this part of the septum. It is not supposed to go and hit the septum as such directly. The air is supposed to go through the middle part of the nose posteriorly. Now, because of this deviation, this area of the septum is repeatedly getting exposed to drying effects of the air. So, there will be crusting in this area, and when this crust gets removed, then there's raw area below that can lead to repeated epistaxis. So, there can be other symptoms. What is that? There can be repeated epistaxis. Now, there can be atrophy of the turbinate because of a DNS, true or false. Atrophy of turbinate can occur. Now, was a question that was asked in one of the choices, which of the following cannot result because of DNS? One of the choices was atrophy of the turbinate. So, can atrophy of the turbinate occur because of pressure on the turbinate, because of the deviation of the septum? Atrophy never occurs. Atrophy does not occur. What occurs is hypertrophy. Okay, so you must be thinking that, okay, deviation and there is compression of the turbinate and that is leading to hypertrophy of the turbinate. Hypertrophy of turbinate occurs. Hypertrophy of turbinate. Okay, now please note here, please see this picture. The hypertrophy occurs not on the site of deviation. It occurs on the opposite side. It occurs on the more roomy side. Yes, why does it occur in the more roomy side? And that happens chronically over years. It takes a long time after the DNS. So when there is a DNS here, now what happens is that the other side becomes more roomy. So more air will enter here. So when there is more of chronically, when this patient is exposed to dry air, so more of dry air, more of cold air entering into the nose. Now, this nostril has to work a lot for temperature regulation and humidification. And the inferior turbinate is the one that is exposed first. The inferior turbinate is the one that plays the maximum role in temperature regulation and humidification. And because of that reason, the inferior turbinate has got a lot of vascular supply. Inferior turbinate has got a lot of venous sinusoids. So, when they repeatedly remain dilated, for temperature exchange to occur. Chronically, what happens? That they tend to remain dilated and then the hypertrophy of the turbinate occurs. There is increase in the sinusoids, there is increase in the dilatation, there is increase in mucus glands. All that leads to hypertrophy of the opposite side. And this patient, now he will have obstruction of the opposite side also. And many a times, this patient is already used to obstruction on one side because of the prolonged DNS that the patient had. So this side obstruction, he has got used to it. Now he comes to you with a complaint that I have obstruction of this side, and when you examine, you see that this side is roomy. That is what is known as paradoxical nasal obstruction. So hypertrophy of the turbinate leads to paradoxical nasal obstruction. Nasal obstruction. So in this patient who is having a paradoxical nasal obstruction, if you just correct this septum will not suffice to completely relieve the patient. In this patient, you will also have to go for a reduction of the turbinate, reduction of the hypertrophic turbinate. And quickly tell me, what's the appearance of the hypertrophic turbinate? Yes, it can be a uniform appearance, uniform big appearance, hypertrophic appearance, or it can be a mulberry-like. Yes, irregular, bulging everywhere. That is a mulberry-like turbinate. Also, many a times, the patients have only one complaint, and that is a cosmetic deformity. Patient have a cosmetic deformity. And can you tell me quickly, what is this type of nose known as? Is it a crooked nose or a deviated nose? Yes, we can see that the whole of the dorsum as well as the tip is deviated to one side. So this is a deviated nose. And this deviated nose, this type of deviation, yes, usually it is because of a deviation of the septum. In this patient, if you just correct the septum, that might suffice to correct the external deformity, to correct the cosmetic deformity. So how do we diagnose that there is a deviation of the septum? All the time it might not be that there is external deviation also, that you will come to know that yes, there is a deviation. Patient has come to you with these complaints of nasal obstruction, maybe recurrent epistaxis, maybe sinusitis, recurrent acute otitis media. How do you know that yes, all these symptoms can be attributed to a deviation of the septum, a DNS? For that, you will have to find a DNS. So how can you find a DNS? Yes, by examining the nose. So how do you examine the nose? yes, you can just, many of the times, there is a lower caudal deviation of the septum that can be visible just by observing the patient like this. Or what you can do is you can go for anterior rhinoscopy. So you can go for anterior rhinoscopy, and this anterior rhinoscopy is done with this instrument, and this instrument is what is known as the thudicum. Is known as thudicum. Thudicum. Or also what you can do is a test which is known as a cold spatula test. Cold spatula test. Now, what is this cold spatula test? You take a tongue depressor, and yes, cold means it is not that you have to take it out from the fridge and you have to keep it like this. Cold means it is just normal temperature, and you ask the patient to breathe out. Now, when the patient breathes out, what you notice is misting in this area, and you compare the misting on both the sides. Now, this test, the cold spatula test, has one problem. What problem? Do you know that at any time both the nostrils do not function optimally? Both of them do not function equally optimally at all times. Always only one nostril functions optimally, the other functions less. Yes, that is what is known as nasal cycle, and this nasal cycle varies in different people from 2.5 to 4 hours, which means that if right now you notice your one nostril might be functioning more, after 2.5 hours the other will function more. That is what is known as nasal cycle, which means that whenever we are testing this, whenever we are doing this test, obviously we cannot expect equal misting on both the sides anyways, normally also, because of the nasal cycle. Yes, so what is nasal cycle? What is the duration of nasal cycle has been a question of your exam. Again, we are going to do this in detail, why it occurs when we do the nerve supply, but for now I'm just telling you, yes, 2.5 to 4 hours is the duration of the nasal cycle. So which means that you do not have to look for equal misting on both the sides. What you have to look for is a gross discrepancy of misting on both the sides. Now also, many times what happens is that the patient complains of nasal obstruction. Patient says, I have a lot of nasal obstruction, and when you do endoscopy, what you see is, or when you do anterior rhinoscopy, what you see is, just see here. Yes, what are you seeing here? That here we have, which is the lateral wall? Yes, we can see the inferior turbinate. So this is the lateral wall and this is the septum. So here we can see a deviation of the septum, and can you notice it is so mild here? It is so little a deviation. So you think that so little deviation and the patient is having so much obstruction, he feels that he is not able to breathe through that side at all. Is it possible? Yes, it is possible. Just notice this area. Do you recognize what this area is? I will help you. Yes, we have the septum on this side. Laterally, we have the inferior turbinate, and yes, what is that area? That is the area of the Lyman nasi. That is the lower border of the upper lateral cartilage. Yes, this is the nasal valve area. This is also already a very, very narrow area. This angle is normally only 10 to 15 degrees. Yes, so it is a very narrow area already. So if there is even little deviation in this part, patient will experience a lot of nasal obstruction. So yes, if there is any obstruction of the nasal valve area, even if it is little, then we can operate and the patient will be relieved. But how do we find out that this obstruction is actually because of nasal valve area only? Yes, we can do this by doing a test that is known as, what we do in this test, first I will tell you. Yes, we ask the patient to, with 2 fingers, yes, pull the cheek laterally. So now what will happen is that this lateral wall will get pulled laterally. So space will be created here. So if it is because of obstruction of nasal valve area, when the nasal valve area is pulled laterally, the space opens up and the patient is relieved. This indicates that this patient has obstruction of nasal valve area, and yes, if you operate on that deviation, the patient will be benefited. And this test is what is known as the Cotter's test. This test is what is known as the Cotter's test. Cotter's test. And the best method to find out whether there is deviation or not, how much deviation is there, whether it is occupying the whole of the septum, whether it is only a posterior deviation, whether it is only an anterior deviation, is is endoscopy. Yes, that will exactly show you where the deviation is and how much is the deviation. So yes, can you make out which is the lateral wall? Yes, we can see the turbinate. Now it is not difficult at all when we see an endoscopic examination. So this is the lateral wall and this is the septum. So this is the deviation that you are seeing on the septum. The endoscopic anatomy, endoscopic appearance is very, very commonly asked. I have already told you that. So here, can you make out? Yes. So don't think that this here, what do you think? This here, this structure, if this is marked, this is a turbinate. Tell me, this is turbinate or not? Yes, see here, you can see this bone as totally separate from the lateral wall. Yes, this is the floor. So this is the lateral wall. This is the turbinate that we are seeing. Yes, see carefully, you will be able to make out this is the turbinate. So this is the septum. Yes, so this is septum, and what you're seeing here is a deviation of the septum. You can see that this is probably at the lower border, at the junction of the cartilage with the maxillary crest, and this is a sharp spur that we are seeing. So here we are seeing a CT also showing the deviation. Do we need to get a CT scan done for confirming that there is deviation of the septum? No, we don't. We don't need to get a CT scan done. We are operating on the septum. We know septum is in the center. This is a relatively safe area. And whenever we are operating on the sinuses, we know there are all important structures all around. Then it is mandatory to get a CT scan done. For ruling out a septal deviation, endoscopy is much sufficient. It is much better than just getting a CT scan done. So no need for a CT scan. So if the patient is symptomatic and you have confirmed that yes, the patient has deviation and you can attribute the symptoms to the deviation, it is only then that you operate. And when we go for septal surgery, the septal surgeries can be of two types. Yes, the first is SMR. SMR. What's the full form of SMR? SMR is submucosal resection of septum. Submucosal resection of septum. And the second is septoplasty. Septoplasty. Now, what is the difference between SMR and septoplasty? I will just show you. Now, before that, what is the age? Is age also a criteria? Yes. This area, we have the secondary centers of ossification, which completely fuse when the complete facial development occurs, and that is by 17 years of age, which means that if we operate in this area before 17 years of age, then there can be the deformity can recur, there can be additional deformity because we are damaging the secondary centers of ossification. That is why if, unless and until the patient has a very severe obstruction and it is affecting the lifestyle of the patient too much, where we can go for a septal surgery earlier. Otherwise, we always wait up till 17 years. Only we operate after 17 years. Even if we have to operate earlier, then we go for a very conservative surgery. And also this is one surgery which can be done very easily under local anesthesia. So always what is preferable is to do it under local anesthesia. Now what is the difference between SMR and what is septoplasty? Now just see here, this is the septum. Now on both the sides of the septum are the mucoperichondrial flaps, mucoperichondrial lining. What's the meaning of mucoperichondrial? Yes, mucosa and perichondrium. Perichondrium is lining the cartilage, or periosteum is lining the bone, the bony part of the septum and the cartilaginous part of the septum. Okay, so what we do in SMR is we give an incision at the lower border of the septum. Where exactly at the lower border, I will just show you. So we give the incision at the lower border and we raise the mucoperichondrial flap on both the sides of the septum. Just see here. Can you see? Now the septum is absolutely free of all the mucosa or the perichondrium lining it. This is the septal cartilage. It is absolutely free of anything on either side. It is free now. It is only cartilage now. Now what I will do now is I will just leave a 1 centimeter strip on the dorsum. Yes, that is the upper part of the septum that forms the dorsum of the external nose. Yes. So a thin dorsal strip around 1 centimeter and a thin caudal strip. Yes. So this is exactly my septum like this. So I have left a thin dorsal and a thin caudal strip. And other than that, Can you see? I have removed the whole of the septum. So L-shaped cartilage strip I have left behind. Rest of the septum I have removed. This is what is known as submucosal resection of the septum. SMR. Can you imagine what will happen if we do this? Yes, we have removed the support of the dorsum of the nose. This dorsum of the nose is supported by the septal cartilage below. And this support we have removed. It is just supported by a thin strut of cartilage here. So now what will happen? This will ultimately result in saddling of the nose. That is why this is usually not preferred. Now what is done in septoplasty is the incision is given at the lower border of the septal cartilage and the mucoperichondrial flap is raised only on one side of the septum so that the mucosa, the perichondrium on the other side is intact, the blood supply is intact, chance of perforation is very less. And now wherever there is deviation, suppose there is deviation here, suppose there is deviation here. So whichever area there is deviation, only that part of the cartilage, only that particular section of the cartilage is removed. So that particular section of the cartilage incision is given and it is freed from the mucoperichondrium of the opposite side. Only that particular part, rest of the mucoperichondrium remains intact everywhere. Yes, it remains adhered to the cartilage. That part of cartilage we have to remove. So we have to free it from both the sides. But we are not freeing the whole of the cartilage as we do in the SMR. So what we are doing here is only this part we are freeing from the other side also and only that particular part we are removing. So we are being very conservative. So which is more conservative, septoplasty or SMR? Yes, septoplasty is more conservative. What is preferred? Septoplasty or SMR? Yes, septoplasty is preferred. SMR is not preferred. SMR can lead to saddling of nose. It can lead to saddling. Yes, so the age is more than 17 years. So now when you see this image, you will understand. So what is this? Yes, can you just see and tell me what surgery this is? Yes, this is SMR. So what is done here is that a thin 1 centimeter strip is left dorsally and caudally. And rest of the septum is removed. Now just see here, when I have to leave this 1 centimeter strip here caudally, so what I do is the incision that I give is a little above the lower border of the septum, little above the caudal border of the septum, because this part you anyway have to leave behind. So you are giving the incision a little above. Whereas in septoplasty what we are doing is we give the incision at the lowermost border of the septal cartilage, quadrangular cartilage, the caudal most part we give the incision. So now if I show you these two incisions, can you tell me which one will be used for SMR and which one will be used for septoplasty? Yes, in SMR, we are leaving the caudal strip. So we are giving an incision little above this. Yes, so this incision is for SMR. This is for SMR and this is what is known as the Killian's incision. How do you remember Killian's incision? Yes, Killian's incision, you are giving this incision and ultimately you are going to kill the whole of the septum. So remember it like that. This is Killian's incision. Definitely it has not been named so because of that. It was the surgeon Killian who made this surgery. So that is why it is Killian's incision. Whereas for septoplasty, the incision will be given lower down. And this incision is what is known as hemitransfixation incision, or more commonly it is known as Freer's incision. Freer's incision. Yes, in your exam is asked what is Killian's incision, what is Freer's incision used for. So yes, Freer's, how can you remember is? Freer's, just remember you are going to do the surgery and free the septum of just its abnormality. Everything healthy you are going to keep behind. So that is what is known as Freer's incision. So this is for septoplasty. Whereas Killian's is for SMR. So as I told you that this surgery is done under local anesthesia. So yes, we are giving the local anesthesia here. Now if I give an incision here, quickly tell me what incision is that? Yes, that is going to be the Freer's incision. If I give an incision here, then that is going to be the Killian's incision. Yes. And after doing this, what we are going to do is we are going to give the incision, and then we are going to raise the mucoperichondrial flap, the mucosa and the mucosa and the perichondrium that was lining the cartilage. We can see the cartilage exposed here, and this we do with the help of this instrument. This is what is known as the Freer's elevator. So this is how the Freer's elevator looks like. It has a blunt end, and this can easily raise the flap from over the cartilage. Now all the instruments I am doing along with the relevant surgeries wherever we are using it here. But if you want it together, you can find it in a separate together section on my YouTube channel, which is in the name of Manisha ENT. So there you will find all the instruments together. Nowadays what is done is even a better method of septoplasty, and that is what is known as endoscopic septoplasty. What is endoscopic septoplasty? Is that you do not even raise one complete side flap. As we were doing in septoplasty, we were raising the flap one side completely. Like this is the septum. In septoplasty, what we were doing is we were raising the mucoperichondrial flap from one side of the septum completely. And then whatever part was deviated, that part we were freeing from the other side, and that part we were removing. That is what is septoplasty. Now endoscopic septoplasty, what we do is that instead of raising this complete flap, we are more conservative. Suppose there is deviation here. There is a sharp deviation here like this. Okay, so what I will do is I will give incision just in front of the deviation here like this. And then I will raise the flap only from this area, separate it from the other side, the cartilage from the other side, and remove it. So that becomes more conservative. That is endoscopic septoplasty. So in endoscopic septoplasty, I will give here, there is the deviation that I am seeing. So I will give the incision just in front of it. I will separate this part of the deviation from the mucoperichondrium from both the sides, from here, and then I will remove. Now when I say that we are raising the mucoperichondrial flaps on both the sides here, okay, don't think that why we always say that in SMR mucoperichondrial flaps are raised on both the sides. In septoplasty, we are raising it only on one side. Yes, so please understand that very clearly. When I say that in SMR mucoperichondrial flaps are raised on both the sides, means that after the incision, I am bearing the cartilage of its mucosa as well as of its perichondrium on both the sides completely like this. Yes. Whereas if I am doing a septoplasty or endoscopic septoplasty, I am just giving the incision here. I am raising the mucoperichondrium from that part of the deviation. And definitely if I have to remove the cartilage, I will have to separate that cartilage from the mucosa from the other side also. I cannot remove the cartilage along with the mucosa. That will lead to perforation of the septum. Yes. So that is what we are doing here. So whenever it is asked that mucoperichondrium is raised on both the sides of the septum, what do you have to answer? In which surgery is that? Yes, it means that complete raising of mucoperichondrium is done on both the sides of the septum. In which surgery? Yes, that is done in SMR. Now, before we see the video for septoplasty, you are going to quickly tell me, yes, what is the name of the septal cartilage? Yes, very good. That was a question of your exam. Yes, quadrangular cartilage. Septum is mainly cartilaginous or mainly bony? Yes, it is mainly bony. What is the most common cause of DNS? Yes, that is birth trauma. Yes, when do you operate for DNS? If you just see a DNS or when the patient is symptomatic? Yes, when the patient is symptomatic, can a DNS lead to epistaxis? Yes or no? Yes, can a DNS lead to complete nasal obstruction of both the sides? Yes or no? Yes, can it lead to hypertrophy of the turbinate? Yes, can it lead to atrophy of the turbinate of one side? Not atrophy. And when both the sides have completely got obstructed, air is now entering so little, then this patient will also have decreased sense of smell. This patient will also have hyposmia. So that also a symptom you can add it there. Definitely that hyposmia will not be only the presenting symptom. This patient will have bilateral, total, very severe nasal obstruction. Which is the test that you do to test the patency of the nasal valve area? What is that test? I've already given the hint. Yes, that is the Cottel's test. Now, what is the surgery that you prefer for a DNS, a septoplasty or a SMR? Septoplasty. What is the incision for septoplasty? Freer's incision. Killian's incision is given for SMR. What is anesthesia usually for septoplasty? Yes, it is a local anesthesia preferably. And what is the age that you should go for septoplasty? Yes, you have to wait for 17 years, preferably after 17 years of age. So now let us quickly have a look at endoscopic septoplasty. So let us see how septoplasty is done. So let me first orient you. This is the right nostril. Can you make out which is the lateral wall and which is the septum? So yes, we can see that there is a projection which is appearing quite separate from the wall. So yes, that is the inferior turbinate and that is the lateral wall. This is the septum and we can see the deviation of the septum there. And whenever there is a deviation on one side, we always prefer to operate, that is, we give the incision on the other nostril so that the area that is available for operating is enough. If we give incision on this side, it is a narrow area, it will decrease our access to the deviation. So we will approach the deviation from the opposite side. So let us see how we do it. So yes, that is a deviation, the deviation of the septum that we are seeing very close now. So yes, on the opposite side, that is the more concave side, more wider side. So here we are giving the incision on the concave side and this incision is being given quite posteriorly just in front of the deviation. The deviation is on the other side. We have an idea where it is. So what is being done is endoscopic septoplasty, that is the most conservative. And now please note that the mucosa and the perichondrium overlying the septal cartilage is being raised. This is known as raising the mucoperichondrial flap. So this is being done with the help of the instrument which is known as Freer's elevator. Yes, we have a similar incision, Freer's incision. Yes, that is the incision for septoplasty. So now this mucoperichondrial flap will be raised up till the bony cartilaginous junction, that is the junction of the quadrangular cartilage with the perpendicular plate of ethmoid is reached. So we are raising it very nicely so that the complete deviated septum, whatever part is deviated, we have given the incision just in front of the deviation. So that part which is deviated can be removed with ease. No mucosa or perichondrium that was overlying it will be damaged. So it is completely being separated. So now the flap has been completely raised from this side and this part of the septum which needs to be removed, the mucosa and the perichondrium from the other side has to be removed very properly so that when we remove the cartilage along with that, the opposite side mucosa and the perichondrium does not get damaged. That will lead to a perforation of the septum. So this part of the septum has to be removed. So we are seeing that only in this part, the cartilage is being separated from the mucosa and perichondrium on both the sides. So now this cartilage is held by Lux forceps and it is being removed in pieces till the whole deviated part is removed. So yes, you can see that very clearly only the septum, only the deviated part of the septum has got removed. No damage to the mucosa on either side has occurred. So this was how a endoscopic septoplasty is done. Now was a question asked in your exam that following surgery, a patient falls off the bed and develops bilateral nasal obstruction. What should be the management of this patient? So the examiner has taken for granted that you have already diagnosed what the diagnosis is and what is asked is the management. So what at all happened to the patient? Yes, first of all, thankfully they did not mention the name of the hospital where this patient post-op fell down off the bed. Otherwise, you know what would have happened. Yes. So now the patient has fallen down and developed bilateral nasal obstruction. Immediately, what has happened? Yes, what has happened is a septal hematoma. Septal hematoma. Yes, just see here. Septal hematoma is bilateral. Septal hematoma, yes, occurs most commonly following trauma. So it occurs most commonly following, occurs following trauma only. And the important thing to note in septal hematoma is that it is always bilateral. Can you see here? Yes, on this side also you are seeing the bulge. On this side also you are seeing the bulge, and that makes it an emergency. Why an emergency? Yes, because what happens when there is a septal hematoma? So whenever there is compression forces on the septum, so the septum gets injured. Okay, so the perichondrium that lines the septum, which is very tightly adherent to it, gets damaged. So that leads to leakage of blood, and this leakage of blood occurs on both the sides. This occurs on both the sides. So now this thing that I'm drawing is the perichondrium. This has got raised on both the sides, and below this we have all blood. We have the hematoma. Yes, completely from above below. Yes, definitely the blood will collect from above to below. So now on both the sides, now the septum is separated from its perichondrial lining, and the blood supply of the septum, the blood supply of the cartilage always comes from the perichondrium. So now if we do not immediately drain this septum of the hematoma, what will happen is that if it for prolonged period remains deprived of the blood supply, then it will result in necrosis of the septum. And even if necrosis occurs, is that so important? Of course it is. We know that this septal cartilage gives support to the dorsum of the nose. So what will happen later on? This will result in saddling of the nose. That is why this is an emergency. And many a times what happens is, nose is the most prominent part of the face. So it gets hit. You are sitting and your friend just turned around and the hand just hit, or you are just walking past and you feel that there is a transparent wall and made of glass, and you don't notice it and you hit. I mean, these things are so common, and you feel that okay, there was a little pain and external, there is no deformity, that's done. Yes, no, you always have to examine the septum, because even if later on you find out, you feel that okay, there is little nasal obstruction because I got hit, and that will be fine. And if later on, yes, if there is, you find out this is there, then the necrosis of the septum, it usually starts within after 72 hours. So now what will happen is necrosis will occur, and later on gradually there will be saddling of the nose. So this is an emergency. So when this question was asked that the patient fell down off the bed, what should be the management? So yes, in the choices were give antibiotics. So give antibiotics for 48 hours and then go for incision and drainage. And one was immediate incision and drainage should be done. So what should be the management? Yes, the management has to be immediate incision and drainage. Immediate or incision and drainage within 48 hours. Within 48 hours, you have to incise and you have to drain the hematoma, drain the blood. And if it is not drained, it can lead to complications. What can be the complications? Yes, we already have that blood there is injury. So this can lead to a septal abscess. So septal hematoma can also lead to complications. It can get infected and it can lead to abscess formation. It can lead to septal abscess. Septal abscess, yes, it follows septal hematoma, but it can follow other conditions also, even a simple furuncle of the nose. If I ask you, furuncle of the nose is localized to which part of the nose? Yes, the vestibule of the nose. Even a small furuncle can lead to a septal abscess, and we know that septal abscess can be dangerous. Why? Because this is the area, this is what is known as the dangerous area. You must have read it. Yes, this is known as dangerous area of the face. Yes, why? Because here the venous supply, it communicates with the deep facial vein, communicates with the pterygoid plexus, which has direct communication with the cavernous sinus. You must have read all this in anatomy. Do you remember? Yes? Okay, so you have to correlate it everywhere so that it automatically gives you a revision and you never forget it. So septal abscess, if a septal hematoma can lead to septal abscess, that can become very dangerous. A septal hematoma can also result in saddling of the nose. Saddling of the nose. So that can be the second complication. There can be another important complication, and that is a perforation of the septum. So a perforation of the septum, perforation of septum can result, and perforation of the septum can be caused by not only by hematoma, it can be caused by many causes. And if we talk about the causes, again, yes, they are asked. A septal perforation can be caused by what and why is it asked? Yes, because septal perforation is a very, very important indicator of granulomatous conditions. Any patient that you are seeing a perforation on the septum, always investigate that patient for granulomatous condition if that patient is not giving any history of surgery. So, the most common cause of septal perforation is a trauma, and usually it is a iatrogenic trauma following septoplasty. Yes, following surgery is most common. It can also occur because of non-iatrogenic trauma, and very, very important to rule out is granulomatous conditions. Granulomatous conditions of the nose. Yes, granulomatous conditions like TB, syphilis, lupus, leprosy, Wegener's, which is nowadays known as granulomatosis, polyangiitis, all these can lead to perforation, and they lead to perforation, all can lead to perforation of the cartilaginous part of septum. Cartilaginous part of septum. But also if there is bony perforation, then we have to rule out two conditions. So if you are seeing in any patient that there is cartilaginous perforation, along with that you are seeing bony perforation, or if you are seeing only bony perforation, then we have to think of which condition. Yes, bony perforation very, very commonly caused by syphilis. Syphilis causes more commonly a bony perforation, and also Wegener's, that is granulomatosis, polyangiitis. Polyangiitis. So you have to rule out granulomatous conditions. You have to rule out drugs, whether this patient is taking drugs. Which drugs? Which drugs? Yes, which drugs lead to a perforation of the septum? Yes, obviously we'll be using it in the nose only. Which one? Yes, nasal decongestants. If you give nasal decongestants, can you name any nasal decongestant for me? Yes, so many, no? Otrivin, Nazivion, you must have heard of it, so commonly used it so commonly. So if you use this nasal decongestant for prolonged period in the nose, what are you doing? Decongestion means you are causing vasoconstriction, you are depriving the septum of the blood supply. That can lead to of septal perforation. So drugs like nasal decongestants. Also very, very important, if there is nasal steroid being used. Nasal steroid, do we use nasal steroids also? Nasal steroid sprays are very commonly used. We will see when we do the disease of the nose. Most of the conditions of the nose, we use nasal steroid sprays. So nasal steroid sprays, if they are, that is why nasal steroid sprays, whenever they are used, I think so many of you must be having allergic rhinitis. So whenever you are using nasal steroid spray, always remember, and yes, that is asked by examiners, what should be the direction of the nozzle when you put nasal steroid spray? Yes, always it should point towards the ear, which means it should point laterally. It should not be on the septum. We anyway want the effect on the sinuses. Now it can also be seen in people who abuse cocaine. Cocaine abusers, yes, they sniff the cocaine and they put it here also, and that is a vasoconstrictor that will lead to the vasoconstriction, that will lead to ischemia, and that can lead to perforation of the septum. So cocaine abusers, it can follow tumors. It can follow tumors, and again, one thing which is seen in Asia, in Asian countries, in India very commonly, and that is nasal myiasis. Nasal myiasis can lead to perforation of the septum. Nasal myiasis. What is nasal myiasis? Maggots of the nose. Maggots. Do you know what is maggots? What is maggots? Yes, just see here. This fly is Chrysomia fly. Chrysomia. It gets attracted into the nose. Why? Where do flies get attracted? Usually wherever there is bad smell, foul smell. So whenever there is foul smell coming from the nose of the patient, usually in patients of atrophic rhinitis, we will see that everything in the nose atrophies, and that leads to a very foul smelling discharge from the nose of the patient. So that attracts the flies, and the flies goes inside and they lay eggs, and ultimately the larva, this larva, multiple of them, hundreds of them, they come out and they eat up the septum. That can lead to perforation of the septum. And in these patients you can also see, can you see here? And yes, don't think this is something that you will not see. You will see it if you are especially in a government hospital. You will definitely find if you go to your wards regularly. So yes, you will see these maggots coming out of the nose. How do you manage it? How will you manage it? Should we go inside the nose and there are hundreds of maggots that you are seeing? Should you go and remove individually one of them, pick up each one of them? Don't even try to do that. Why? Because they will go and hide in the metatarsus, and you will not be able to remove them. In fact, you will cause more harm, more damage than benefit. So what has to be done here for the management is you first kill the maggots. How do you kill the maggot? So we will give the patient chloroform water and turpentine oil. So this, as drops will be instilled into the nose, the maggots will die off, and then we remove these maggots by nasal douching. Is it similar to ear foreign body? Yes, ear foreign body. What you do in the ear also, you do the same thing. You do not use chloroform water and turpentine oil in the ear. Yes, why I am telling you is because many times you will find your relatives, friends calling you that something has gone, some insect has gone into the ear of their child, or any adult also, and that causes a lot of irritation in the ear. Why lot of irritation? The insect will be moving to trying to come out at the level of the isthmus. It has got stuck, it is not able to come out. So what you will do? Yes, immediate management has to be to kill the insect. How to kill the insect? Yes, just put oil in the ear. That will block off all the air supply. It will block off all the air supply and the insect will die. And then what you can do is you can go for syringing. Then you can remove the insect by syringing. So here also what you're doing is you're killing the insect first. How are you killing the insect? By putting chloroform water and turpentine oil. And then you have to remove by nasal douching. What is nasal douching is a syringe is filled with solution, and just for removing this maggots you can just fill it with saline, because you just have to flush the nose and it is pushed into the nose. Or there is a device like this bottle. Yes, this douching is used very commonly in conditions of the nose, other conditions of the nose also. We will see that later on. So it pushes the water inside, and along with that all the maggots will come out. Now, perforation of the septum can also be caused by a foreign body of the nose. Yes, kids are so expert in putting foreign bodies inside the nose. So, which foreign body can lead to perforation of the septum? Yes, foreign body battery. A foreign body battery is again an emergency, because it will leak, it will lead to necrosis, it can lead to perforation. And also, so this can lead to perforation. And also, what a foreign body, if it stays for very long, then there can be calcium deposition around the foreign body. That is what is known as rhinolith. A foreign body of the nose for very long. Does it happen? Very commonly it happens. Yes, many a times parents have noticed that the child has put something into the nose, and they are seeing that the child is putting, and they have noticed, they will bring the child. Many a times the child is also smart enough, child will tell that I have put something into the nose. But usually many a times they are playing with each other, and one child will put something in the nose of the other child, and the child will not know that something has happened. He will never tell the parents, and the foreign body will remain there for very long. And here is a very important question that is asked from you, that when do you suspect in a child that there is foreign body in the nose? Just by history, how can you suspect that there is foreign body in the nose? Yes, any child who is presenting with unilateral nasal discharge, usually sinusitis and all this, not very common, and that also unilaterally leading to nasal discharge in child, not common. So whenever there is any unilateral nasal discharge in child, always rule out of foreign body. So most common presentation of foreign body of nose is unilateral foul smelling nasal discharge. Foul smelling nasal discharge. And if the foreign body stays for very long, then there can be calcium deposition around the foreign body, and that is what is known as rhinolith. Rhinolith. So otherwise, if there is foreign body which is for a very prolonged period, and even rhinolith also, you can just remove in the OPD itself. Do you have to give an anesthesia for removal of the foreign body? If you're removing it in the OPD, you do not need any anesthesia. Yes, you do not need any anesthesia. If the procedure has not been successful, or in foreign bodies which are quite posteriorly, or rhinolith where you can make out that this is quite adherent to all the surrounding structures, which will be difficult to remove, only then you go for general anesthesia. Otherwise, you can just remove it in the OPD itself. And let us quickly have a look of how we remove the foreign body of the nose in the OPD. So let us see how a foreign body of the nose is removed in the OPD. And this patient, yes, this child came to me, I think that was last week, only just few days back. And the history was that she has put some roasted chana in the nostril. Now, please note how the child is being made to sit. This is done without any anesthesia, and this is a one-go procedure. The child will not let you do this again. He will not let you touch again. So, see how the legs have been put in between the legs of the parents and how the hands are being held. And yes, a lot of chocolates have been given to the child earlier, and few pictures were clicked of the child and shown to the child. And the child, I told her that now I'm going to click a picture when the child closes the eye also, and that is going to look very beautiful. And that is why the child is sitting so quietly, waiting for her pics to be clicked. Thankfully, with the advent of so many phones, kids know what it is. So the child has closed the eye for a pic to be taken, and the instrument that I am using here is the eustachian tube catheter. See, it is just a one-go procedure, and if you are not able to remove the foreign body in one go, the child will not allow you to touch again. And in that case, if the foreign body has not been removed, then a GA will need to be given so that the child is relaxed and we can remove the foreign body. Now, the instrument that I was using in that video for removing the foreign body of the nose is the eustachian tube catheter. Yes, so this is again one question that is asked in your exam, that eustachian tube catheter, when the uses are given, a eustachian tube catheter can be used to remove foreign body of the nose. Yes, is that true or not? And then you think eustachian tube catheter, name is eustachian tube. Foreign body of the nose, yes, we use it very commonly for removing foreign body of the nose because it has this curve here, and this area is not sharp, this is blunt, this end. So it is passed behind the foreign body and the foreign body is pulled out. So we saw so many causes of perforation. So nasal septal perforation is asked in your exam, and in septal perforation, yes, what you have to remember and what is most commonly asked usually is that granulomatous conditions can lead to septal perforation. Nasal myiasis is asked in your exam. Which granulomatous condition leads to bony perforation most commonly? Yes, can you tell me? Yes, syphilis. Syphilis can lead to bony perforation. What is the most common cause of perforation? Yes, that is septal surgery. And which surgery can lead to perforation? Most commonly it is SMR. Yes, septoplasty can also lead to, but if not properly done, but the chances are more in SMR because you have raised the perichondrial flaps on both the sides of the septum. So how do you then manage a septal perforation? Does septal perforation give any problem, or is it just an incidental finding? Yes, the septal perforation can lead to problems like when there is a perforation on the septum, then the area that creates an area where a narrow area through which when the air passes, the turbulence can increase. So that leads to increased turbulence of the air, that can lead to whistling sound. So that can lead to the symptoms of perforation can be a whistling sound. Whistling sound whenever the patient is breathing, that can be very embarrassing. Yes. Also, there can be a lot of crusting. Why? Because the velocity of the air increases and that leads to a lot of crusting in that area. So we need to manage this. So how do we manage is either by non-surgical method. If there is only crusting, there is no whistling, then you can just give lubricants to the inside the nose to prevent dryness. Or what can be put is a button like this. So in the management, in the non-surgical management, lubricants can be given. Lubricants in the form of ointments. Ointments can be given, or what can be used is a nasal button. Button. What is this button? Yes, just see here. Yes, on the patient puts this button, so on both the sides of the septum. So now this perforation, we can see it is closed. So this can be used as a method. Now if the or also what can be done is surgical repair. surgical method, surgical repair can be done. Now, surgical repair can be done for any perforation, whether it is small or whether it is large. For very large perforations also, a surgical repair using flaps can be done. Now, for very large perforations, usually a button does not suffice. Why? Because if you use a button, see how it is, no matter, it is a little thick, right? So if you're putting a very big button, that will cause, it will occupy a lot of space and that will cause nasal obstruction. So if it's a very large perforation, usually surgical repair with flaps is done. So surgical repair with flaps can be done. Okay, so now you are going to quickly tell me, septal hematoma is unilateral or bilateral? Bilateral. Is it an emergency? How do you manage septal hematoma? Patient fell off or got hit on the nose, developed septal hematoma. How do you manage it? Incision and drainage within 48 hours. How do you manage nasal myiasis? How do you manage nasal myiasis? Yes, you first kill the maggots by turpentine oil and by chloroform water, and then you go for nasal douching. How do you manage a septal perforation? Septal perforation, any patient of septal perforation should be investigated for granulomatous condition. So if it is falling granulomatous condition, then you will also treat the granulomatous condition. Yes, so you have treated the granulomatous condition, the patient is okay, but the perforation is still there. Then how do you repair it? Yes, non-surgical, the obturator you can use. That obturator is what is a button, or you can go for surgical repair. So that is what you need to know in the clinical anatomy and the disease of the septum. But now, yes, let us see quickly what the roof of the nose is. So now the roof of nose, you already know that, right? Yes, roof of nose is very good cribriform plate, but that does not complete the answer. The roof of nose is, yes, formed by the cribriform plate, but that forms the middle part. And most of the part of the roof, yes. Anteriorly, we have a small part this area, a small part, this is formed by the frontal bone. And posteriorly, we have this part of the roof of the nose, this is formed by the anterior face of the sphenoid bone. So the roof of the nose is formed mainly by the cribriform plate. This is main, but this is the middle part. Anteriorly, we have the frontal bone, and posteriorly, we have the sphenoid. Now here, very, very important is that the most important part of this roof is, yes, it is the cribriform plate of ethmoid. And what we have to know in this roof is that the roof is clinically very, very important. Now, why is this roof important? Before that, let us quickly see how the cribriform plate looks like, how the anatomy of the cribriform plate is. Now, just see here, cribriform plate, whenever we draw like this, it is the roof of the nose, but it is not like this. The cribriform plate is like a fossa. You can say it is like a utensil. Yes, it is like a fossa. This here is the crista galli. Yes, in the center. Now, cribriform plate has two parts. This is what is known as the medial lamella. And this is what is known as the lateral lamella. This is known as lateral lamella. Now, the lateral lamella articulates with a very thick bone here. This is the orbital plate of the frontal bone, also known as fovea ethmoidalis. Now, what's the significance of knowing this? Now, this junction, this area, this is a very thick bone and lateral lamella is very, very thin. Yes, we know in the cribriform plate we have multiple perforations also. It is known as cribriform. And this is a very thin plate of bone. So, this is very thin and this is thick. So, this makes the cribriform plate, this area, as the weakest part of the base of skull, which means that if there is any injury leading to CSF leak, what will be the most common site? Yes, what is the most common site of CSF rhinorrhea? Most common site of CSF rhinorrhea, we have done it later also. Most common site of CSF rhinorrhea, when we have done CSF rhinorrhea. Yes, but now also I am telling you this. Yes, it is fracture of cribriform plate. Fracture of cribriform plate, and if I ask you exactly which part, yes, the lateral lamella. Lateral lamella is fractured most commonly. Yes, so that makes this cribriform plate very, very clinically significant. Another important clinical significance of the cribriform plate is that whenever we are operating doing endoscopic sinus surgery, we have to be very careful about this cribriform plate. Why? Because in some people, the cribriform plate, this fossa can be very deep, the olfactory fossa. So it is mandatory that you get a CT scan done before surgery, before doing endoscopic sinus surgery, functional endoscopic sinus surgery, FES. It is mandatory that we have to get a CT scan done and see where the level of the cribriform plate is. So now just see in the CT scan. Can you see this? Now you'll be able to make out the parts of the cribriform plate. Yes, this here. This here, can you see this? Yes, so this is the cribriform plate. Yes, tell me, what is this? This part is? Yes, medial lamella. What is this? This is the lateral lamella. What is this? This is the fovea ethmoidalis, and this is the olfactory fossa. Now, this olfactory fossa can be a little deep, can be very deep. So, according to the depth, it has been divided into 3 types, and this was done by Quiros. So just see here, in this patient, this is the olfactory fossa. See, this much. Okay. Now here it is this deep. Okay. Now have a look here. Just see here. Here it is this deep. Can you make out? Yes. So the 3 types the classification has been given by Quiros. This is known as Quiros classification. Type 1. This is type 2. This is type 3. In one, the depth is around 1 to 3 millimeters. 2 is more deeper. This is around 4 to 7 millimeters. And this is usually the common variety. But in some people, it can be around 8 to 16 millimeters. See how deep this is. Yes, so if this is very deep and you're not aware of it, then you think that, okay, I've just reached only this much and the cribriform plate will be higher, and you end up injuring the cribriform plate. That will result in CSF rhinorrhea. The perforations for the entry of the olfactory nerves. So where the olfactory nerves are entering into the brain, this acts as a route for entry of nasal infections also into the brain intracranially. That is why this area of the cribriform plate of the roof of the nose is what is known as the danger area of nose. This is known as danger area of nose. Yes, don't confuse it with danger area of face. This triangular area of the face, this is known as danger area of face. This is known as danger area of nose. Yes, why? Because infection can go intracranially through the nerves. Infection can go intracranially through the nerves. So quickly tell me, what is the roof of the nose formed by? Yes, the roof of the nose entirely is formed by the frontal bone. Posteriormost part is the anterior face of the sphenoid bone, and most of the roof is formed by the cribriform plate. What is the most common site of CSF rhinorrhea? What is the most common site of fracture of the cribriform plate? Yes, the lateral lamella. Most common cause of CSF rhinorrhea is fracture of cribriform plate, and most common site of cribriform plate fracture is the lateral lamella. What is Quiros 2? Quiros 2 is depth of olfactory fossa is 4 to 7 millimeters. So now let us do the floor of the nose. The floor of the nose we know is the palate, and palate is formed by which bones? Yes, palate is palatine bone. Has to be palatine bone, yes. But the palatine bone forms the palate posteriorly. The palatine bone is a L-shaped bone like this. It has a horizontal plate and it has got a vertical plate. Yes, so can you see this? This is the vertical plate of the palatine bone. This is the horizontal plate of the palatine bone. So yes, the floor of nose is formed posteriorly by the palatine bone, horizontal plate of palatine bone, and anteriorly. This area, what is this? Yes, this is the palatine process of the maxilla. Maxillary bone gives the process. This is the palatine process of maxilla. This is palatine process of maxilla. So yes, quickly revise the septum, the diseases of the septum, and yes, for completion, the roof and the floor of the nose.